Alimony is sometimes called spousal support, and one of the reasons that makes sense is that alimony is the flow of funds from one spouse to another. It can happen during a divorce, but most people think of it in the context of alimony post-divorce. So it's separate from property division. It's more about cash flow. So here's an example. Say we divided the assets in a divorce roughly 55% to one spouse and 45% to the other, but one spouse out-earned the other one significantly. There's a chance, depending on certain factors and a lot of background about how things work and what individual people's goals are, and how a judge views things, it's possible that after the property division, there will also be money, like new money from current income, going from one spouse to the other spouse post-divorce. In Connecticut, there isn't alimony in every case. So the first thing that you need to think about when it comes to alimony is you have to figure out whether or not there will be any alimony. And so that's the threshold question. Will there be alimony in this case? And then the second question is, if so, if there is going to be alimony, how much alimony will there be, and how long will that alimony exist for? When it comes to that first question of whether there will be alimony in a case, Connecticut judges have a series of factors that they consider. Now, they're not required to weigh every factor, and they're not required to weigh them equally. So there's still a lot of flexibility, but generally speaking, the factors can be a way to get a sense over whether or not something is more likely to be an alimony case. So things like the length of the marriage. Have the parties been married a long time? The earning capacity of the parties. For example, does one spouse substantially out-earn another spouse, and are they likely to do so in the future? Another factor involves the party's health. Are they both healthy? Does one have some physical ailments that makes it difficult for them to earn and support themselves outside the home, or at least to support themselves along the lines of the same spouse? So that's kind of a sense of the complete picture that judges tend to look at when they're figuring out whether or not one spouse will pay alimony to the other. The thing I like to say is, don't think for a minute that this has anything to do with whether it's a woman paying alimony to a man paying alimony to a woman. That's not one of the things we're thinking of. Women pay alimony to men pay alimony to women pay alimony to women, men pay alimony to men. That's not the main issue. The main issues that we think about are how people are able to provide for themselves in the future. And was it a long marriage where the family income was more heavily weighed towards one person than the other, so that it will make it difficult for the lower earning spouse to live in the future post-divorce without that support from their former spouse? Once we know whether or not there's going to be alimony in a case, the next question becomes, how much is there going to be and how long is it going to be for? And that last question, how long is alimony going to last, is what I want to spend a little time on now. So for example, there's a concept called temporary alimony. What that means is something less than permanent, right? So if you have permanent alimony and temporary alimony might mean that there's alimony for a month or a year or 10 years or 15 years, or until your spouse retires, or until someone hits age 65, or until someone can collect Social Security or can withdraw from retirement accounts. There are all sorts of different scenarios for how long alimony will last, and a lot of them fall into the category of temporary. So let's turn and talk about permanent alimony for a minute. A lot of times that's called lifetime alimony. Lifetime alimony basically means that I will pay you alimony for your entire lifetime or my entire lifetime. There aren't as many of these cases as there used to be. In a lot of cases, it's more likely to be long-term temporary alimony because courts are mindful of things like retirement. We don't want to force someone to work until they're 95 so that they can pay their alimony, things like that. So when you think about the things that impact the term of alimony, how long it will last, it's the same factors that go into figuring out whether or not there'll be alimony at all, combined with the realities of the longevity of work life. One of the things that people ask us about a lot when they're thinking about their own divorce and alimony, whether or not they might be the person who's likely to receive alimony, or they might be the person who's more likely to pay alimony. One of the things they ask is, well, how to make sure it's fair? What's fair? And that's an important question. It's one of the things that having good, candid legal counsel can really help with, because what's fair for one person might not feel fair to another person at all. So one of the things experienced lawyers do is they explain how a court is likely to view things so that you have sort of the ocean you're swimming in, right? You know the outer boundaries of what we tend to be talking about, what a court views as fair. And then we take that, how a court might view things, and we fold it into what your goals are for your future. Your alimony structure with your goals for the future is in reference to like the actual reality you're dealing with, right? So if we really don't think that a judge would think something is an alimony case, but you want a lot of alimony, that might not be a likely outcome. So what we do is together talk about, okay, so what are we really talking about when we want alimony? Maybe it's a sense that I want to know that I'm financially secure when I leave the marriage. And then what we work on is, well, if alimony isn't the likely way to achieve that in this case, maybe there's some other way to make sure you're not worried about financial security. So the idea is that alimony is something that is available, but sometimes it's more likely than others. And what you want to know is it likely in my case? If so, how much? How long is it likely to last? And meeting with an experienced lawyer can give you a sense of how a court would view that and how you should be thinking about it as you're making decisions in your divorce. So a common misconception is that there's automatic alimony or automatic child support that kicks in the minute a divorce is filed. That may be the case in some states, but it's actually not the case in Connecticut. Just the act of starting a divorce, filing a divorce, does not mean that alimony or even child support turn on. The question is really, during the divorce itself, how are the parties living their lives? Are both parents still in one home, taking care of the children out of a joint bank account and budget? In that case, there probably isn't going to be child support. Or in the case of alimony, are people living separately, and does someone need help with having sufficient funds to pay bills, or are they still operating on a joint bank account even though they're living in two separate houses? So it's very specific to the situation at hand for each individual couple and family and how they're ordering their lives during the divorce. But it's important to know two things. One, it's not automatic. There's not automatically child support or alimony while your divorce is pending. And two, you can go to the court to ask for it if you need it because you aren't living together or there aren't sufficient assets to care for children or to support yourself absent an award of alimony or child support going into effect during the divorce. If you have any questions about alimony, don't hesitate to reach out. We're here and we're happy to walk through it with you.